Maggie, Thomas Gerard, Mannard.
I answer to all of them.
You answer to all of them. You've got so many friends. I'm sure we all just have different loving names for you. So
Maybe.
So thank you for your willingness to come to share your story. And again, I apologize because every time I got someone, not better than you, but someone was in the area, I wanted to get them because I knew you were very gracious to be bumped.
Of course.
At least 3 times.
I probably was happy to be bumped for a few times.
I know. So to begin with, can you just tell us briefly a little bit about your family, your parents, where you grew up, your siblings?
Sure. My mom was born in Chicago from Irish immigrant parents, and my dad was born in New Orleans. And his father died when he was a baby. And so my grandmother married again several years later, but they could not find work in New Orleans. So they came up to Chicago, and so my father went to high school in Chicago. And my mom and dad met at a bunco game in one of the Catholic churches, in the basement of one of the Catholic churches. But as kids, we loved to ask my mom and dad, tell us how you met, tell us how you met.
Right.
And I'm sure a lot of people do that. And I think I heard it 55 times, but it was always fresh.
A nice love story.
Yes, yes it was. And my dad loved to tell it because he said he was at the bunco game, and all of a sudden he spotted this cute little redhead. And so he said, I want to get up to that table and get to know her better. And so he did, and that's the end of the story. They dated for about 6 or 7 years because that was the Depression years. And the only job, or the one steady job he had, was an usher at a movie theater, so he couldn't get married on that money. So about at the end of the 30s, the economy got a little better, so he got a job as a mailman. And then in 1938, they got married. And in 1939, I came along, and then my brother Tom, then my sister Pat, and then my younger brother Joe.
And they were, your mother and dad, were a loving, fun couple, and he loved your mother to the very end.
Yes, he did.
Yeah.
Yes,
they
he
were
did.
fun to be with.
Yes,
Yeah.
he did. And I'll tell you a little story. When they, in their elderly years, we had a fella come and stay with them in Chicago. They had moved back to Chicago. They had been in Florida. And this young man was about 30, and he was a nice kid, and he'd stay. He had a little mat he'd stay on in the house, a little like a sleeping bag. But he and my mom, he'd go into my mother's room, and they'd laugh and laugh. And my dad said to my mother one day, I don't like all that laughing in there. She says, what do you mean?
Oh.
He says, well, I don't, you're still beautiful. And my mother said, oh, you're a fool. So, yes, he did. He was always jealous of her.
Yeah, he was very sincere.
Yeah, you knew them. So.
Yeah. So you went to school?
I went to...
Not to Aquinas?
No, I did not go to Aquinas. And I wanted to go to Aquinas. But we were down the street from the Academy of Our Lady Longwood, so I went up there. And I really got to know the Adrians, though, at St. Killian's. We moved to Killian's when I was just starting 5th grade. We had been in an apartment, and we finally got a house. And then in 5th grade, I got to know the Adrians. And they were I loved them. I did go to the Kentucky Dominicans, Our Lady of Peace, in my kindergarten to 5th grade. Excuse me. But the thing that impressed me, well, they were fun, and they were very human, the Adrians. And even as a kid, I was so impressed. They'd stay after school so many times, many of them, and help the kids. And we had big classes, they had 55, 60 kids. So it was difficult to teach all of them, but they were always fun, and their interaction. I was very conscious of that, and it was great. They were funny. One of the nuns I had, John Ellen, who was my sponsor, Sister John Ellen Collins, she would be mad at one of the boys, and she'd be scolding him, and she'd say, even as I'm scolding you, you're growing in front of me. But there was always humor with it, and that was great.
Now, your vocation, you had the IBVMs.
No, I had SSNDs at Longwood.
At Longwood. You're an Adrian Dominican right now. What's your vocation story?
Well, I think, as I mentioned to you, I was impressed with the Adrian Dominicans when I was at Killian's. And then in freshman year, we had a retreat, as many of the Catholic schools did, a day or two, maybe 2 days. And two of the things that the priest said to us, I still remember. One of them was, even though you're freshmen, after high school, you should really know what you're going to do, and don't start learning it in senior year. Now, that could be changed a lot today. But, and the other thing was, this retreat, if you could keep it at home, be quiet at home. So when I went home, I told my mom about that. And I said, Mom, I think I'll go upstairs. I had a room upstairs. And I'd like to just be quiet, which will surprise many people as they hear this. But so my mom said, that's fine. So, of course, I fell asleep when I went upstairs. I wasn't deep in prayer or anything. But I woke up. My dad woke me up, and he says, I have your dinner. That was the story. And Mom and Dad both said, let's help her keep the retreat. So I had dinner upstairs. My dad brought the dinner.
Oh, that's what he meant. He had your dinner.
I have your dinner. And I thought I'll never forget that. That was so thoughtful. And it was just very tender,
touching
I thought.
moment, I can tell.
It was. It was a very touching moment. How thoughtful they were.
What do you suppose made it so touching for you?
Well, because they wanted to help me keep the retreat.
Yeah.
And they thought, if you come downstairs for dinner, you won't be keeping the retreat without the other kids. And then, so I thought about, that probably ignited my desire to be...
The retreat,
right,
and the quiet and the time by yourself.
Right. And but then, it kind of faded because I had sophomore year and junior year, and there were boys. And I thought, this thing about the convent, I don't know about that. But then junior year, it came back. We call it the call or the feeling, or the desire.
And sometimes you can't describe it. It's just, it's there.
You cannot describe it. And it's like a movement toward, or anyway, I can't describe it. So, excuse me.
We are called, and you keep hearing that.
That's right. Well, I think it's like a man and a woman who are, they're called to each other. I mean, they get married, and that love, and maybe it's love that moves us. I don't know. But anyway, it was very strong, and so I wanted to enter after junior year.
Right.
And my parents, the only thing, they were very happy that I was going to the convent. I mean, in the sense of, they were proud of me. They would have been proud of me if I...
No matter what.
No matter what. But they were concerned about, why don't I finish senior year? And I guess they talked to some of the nuns over at Killian's or something. And so I'm very happy that I entered after junior year, because I got to know you.
So you entered in
crowd.
1956, June
right.
26th?
Right,
Yes.
June 26, 1956.
So you didn't finish high school?
No.
Where'd
I
you
finished high school when I was in the postulancy.
Oh,
I got my diploma from St. Joseph Academy.
Got it. I know you're young in the crowd, but...
Not the youngest.
Not the youngest, that's right. So then, from following formation, anything in particular with when you entered? Sometimes we had fun things with our obediences. That means our jobs.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I remember one thing that happened in the postulancy that had really nothing to do with the postulants, but I got a picture of my brother Joe is 13 years younger than I am, 12 or 13 years younger. And so when I entered, he was just 3 or 4.
Right.
So at Christmas time, my mom sent me a picture of him with Santa Claus. And Margaret Phillip, who was our director, our postulant director, said to me, put that on the piano because it'll help people to think of home, and which I thought was very sweet.
Right.
I didn't do it, though. I thought, oh, that's silly. I don't want to do that. I'll be embarrassed. And about 2 hours later, she said, where's that picture? I got it out and put it on the piano. But I thought that was very sweet of her to say that. And I didn't have any, I liked the postulancy and the novitiate, and then I stayed in to study after novitiate. And then I went to Blessed Sacrament. My first assignment was Blessed Sacrament.
All right, so your ministries.
Okay, my ministries as most.
We can't go through all of them. We like to perhaps look at one or two that were very significant and had an impact on you and who you are at this time, and also had an impact. I don't think we can have an impact on ourselves without being touched by the experience.
Well, like most of us, we taught.
Right.
And then right around the time of Vatican II, I was at a parish, St. Philomena, where I was teaching. And there was in Detroit, there was a lot of discussion about Catholic schools. They were having a hard time making it. So our school closed, St. Philomena. And the pastor asked me, which was very unusual at that time, to work in the parish with adults. And it was pastoral associate, be a pastoral associate. And I loved it. That was my passion. I loved working with the adults. And we just had a wonderful, I was there 10 years at Philomena's, and I used to call it the Camelot years because we worked as a team. We had a laywoman and then a couple of priests and the nuns, and Janet Scheffler and Mary Ellen McClanahan did religious ed, and the first thing I did was take census, and I said, I don't want to take it unless we follow up on it. And so we all followed up on it. I did, as well as, because you can't do it by yourself, one person. And that was very significant, and I loved that. And as I went to, did this work, I knew people would open up, say things about themselves, and I thought, I think I need to get a little more knowledge about this. So this was a little later on. I did go and get my MSW, but that was later on, and in counseling. So I was very happy about that too.
And then you moved to Chicago.
Then I moved to Chicago.
Back.
But in between there, and this is one of the reasons. Our community helps us grow so much. I think it helped me grow, to broaden myself. And I have taught migrants for a summer. I went to CPE, which is Clinical Pastoral Education. That was wonderful down in Houston, Texas. And then I went to Berkeley for a year in theology, but it wasn't heavy theology. It was more practical. I loved it there. I just loved it. And that came from being the remembering. We had a gathering of the whole congregation, and remembering one day they had a group, they had a gathering of people who were interested in pastoral work and adults. And I asked the question, is there any place where we can get theology? I said, I don't want to go 4 years to school and get that kind of theology, but I would like practical theology that will help me in the parishes. And that's when they said only 2 schools at that time, many more do it now, but Boston College and Berkeley. And I was approved to go to Berkeley, and Nadine Foley was our study, and she was wonderful. I loved it out there. It was great.
So you were there for a year.
Yeah,
and at
10
that
months
time,
probably.
At that time, you were Mary Margaret, or Thomas Gerard, or
No, we had changed our names. This was after Vatican II. The other thing that was a great blessing to me was I was in Detroit after Vatican II, or during that time when the documents started to get flesh upon them, and Dearden was our cardinal. and he was a great leader in the Vatican II renewals and stuff.
How was renewal for you personally?
I loved it.
You didn't have trouble with the changes?
No, it was, for me, it was freeing, and I never felt constricted, but it opened up so many areas for us, and really, I think, helped people find their real area of passion and love and their talents, the use of their talents.
And you were very good in relaying that to the adults that you worked with.
Well, thank you.
Be it our women, because you were in leadership with our women in Chicago.
Yes, I was.
And you loved the parish work that you have done. You speak frequently of a group that you had in Chicago or Flossmoor, wherever
This
that was.
Yes.
That was a very significant group.
Very
What do you
significant.
suppose made it so special?
Well, we were kind of all in it together. I had worked at St. Alexander.
Right.
And I wanted to start a group for women, like a spiritual book group. But I just couldn't get it going. I tried it once and it didn't work too well, I didn't think. But then a school sister of Notre Dame came, and she was a spiritual director and a counselor, and we talked, and she knew a lot of books that I didn't know that we could take with these women, and we invited, instead of just put it in the bulletin, we invited people to come who we knew that would be interested in that. And that changed things because they were interested in it too.
Well, and the fact that they were invited.
Yes.
There's something about that
Yes,
personal
that's right.
invitation.
But it's still going on. It's been
Right, I
going
know.
on 12 years. And the reason I liked it, you asked me that, is because we kind of were all there together, sharing our stories, sharing our faith, struggling and searching. Both struggling and searching for God in our life. And the women, they're normal, but they're very intelligent, smart women, bright women, and very interested, and they're not people who are what we might say super religious, but they're searching for God in ways that they can find in normal everyday living. And I loved it. It was great. And they were wonderful.
And I know you miss it.
I do
you
miss it.
them.
I miss that a lot. I like sharing in discussion and hearing what other people's, whatever, if it's about spirituality or anything, but especially spirituality. You and I kind of share a little bit.
Every day. Do you, besides what we have done, do you tell them what we do? Quickly.
Well, we call each other most every morning and give each other a little word for the day. It usually a little fervorino, we might call it, or maybe from scripture or something. And it kind of focuses my day.
Right.
Not always. I forget it sometimes, but
You've had other experiences in your life or people that have been very significant and maybe life-changing or challenging. Do you, is there someone in particular that...
Well, I was thinking about that, and when I was at Blessed Sacrament, that was my first mission. And Sister Helen Morrison came there when I was my 4th year out on mission. And I found her just a very wonderful principal and leader. And she gave me responsibility. I think she believed in me. She helped me gain confidence in myself. And I think that was very important when you're young and I was young when I entered, a little younger than most people. The other person, of course, who has helped many of our sisters is Carol Johannes. She's very helpful to me. You know, you and I are of the generation where when we learned about God, it was the God of judgment. We knew God loved us, but he loved us, but. And Carol has taught many of us, including me, the God of love, and that's a big thing. I think it changes one's life because,
Oh, right.
tremendously. And then Noreen Burke, who I've known.
Nice. Mm-hmm.
And she's very patient and very different than I am, very more quiet and calm. And she's tried to teach me those things. I don't know how well I've done, but
You have your moments.
yes, I have.
Peace
She
and
doesn't
quiet.
teach me by telling me.
No.
She teaches me, like all of those people, by their example.
By their presence.
Yeah.
By their presence in
Right.
your life. Is there someone else that's significant in your life that you'd like to tell us about?
Well, my aunt was my mother's sister, was very significant to me. I was named after her, Margaret, and she wrote to me every single day of my postulancy and novitiate. And if I have a regret, it's that I didn't appreciate that enough. And I certainly appreciate it now because I know that writing is
Challenging.
Sure it is. And she'd send me all, I love sports. And so she'd send me all about the White Sox and the Bears and the, all, I know you're shaking your head. But, and she also was a woman ahead of her times. She really supported my grandfather and grandmother, who were, as I said, Irish immigrants. She was out working very early in her life. And people don't know Chicago, but LaSalle Street is known as well, it's called the street, like Wall Street. It's comparable to that. And she worked there and many women were not working there. It was a man's world. And she was a very strong, and went to Mass every single day. And a couple of the guys in the parish used to say, at 6:30 in the morning, she looks like she was always dressed very professionally. And when we changed from our out of habit, she wasn't real happy with that. But she said, for heaven's sake, dress professionally. And she also, for many years, bought us our school clothes when we started school. And she was a strong woman.
Excuse me. Your family.
Yes.
I know your family's very significant,
Yeah.
significant part of your life. The Chicago cop and whatever.
Yeah, well, it's my brother-in-law.
Yeah.
And my dad was became a mail inspector. So there's a lot of police
Right,
in the family and lawyers. That's funny.
And your brothers?
And my brother lives in Arlington Heights, and he has done very well. He just worked very hard. He was in the seminary for a while, a long time. He was there 6 years. And then my sister is, she's very much like my mom, very warm, very loving. She's really kind of, I would say right now, she's the heart of our family. And then my brother Joe, who is my younger brother, as I said, he is very, very intelligent, and he's a professor in Pennsylvania. He has 4 children, and 3 of them, the first 3 are autistic. The first 2 of them, are on the autistic. Ian, his only son, is very autistic. He cannot speak. And his other daughter, she's Asperger's, and the other one has some emotional problems. So it hasn't been easy. So when they had the 4th child, of course, all of these kids were close together, so they didn't know about this, right away. But Kathleen
They didn't know, your brother and sister
my brother,
didn't
and
know.
people didn't
at that
know
time,
about
right.
autism. That's,
Right.
30 years ago, and it was just starting to be studied more.
So how old are these kids?
Well,
I
they're-
think of them as...
they're older now. Kathleen, the youngest, is just starting law school. Oh, no, she's got a year in law school, and she's studying environmental law.
Wonderful,
She's at the
wonderful.
University of Pittsburgh. Anyway, when Kathleen, Joe and Robin, that's his wife, they had these 3 kids. And then they had, Joe, one day I got a call, and Kathleen had leukemia. She is the youngest of the children. So we had these 3, and then this little one. And my sister and I flew out there right away, and we helped them. But I think that was the worst week of my life.
Oh,
It was
yes.
so stressful. And for him and Robin, Robin stayed at the hospital with Kathleen, and my sister stayed with her, and I stayed home with Joe and the kids. And just to be there if he had to leave or anything. But they're saints.
They really are, and you've been a great support to them
Well-
from what you've shared, but I don't know, they have to have great faith
Well,
how that they can
yeah. they keep
continue, and
going.
yet they do.
I just talked to my brother the other day, and he said, and he never complained. Never, and he loves his teaching. That's his outlet. And he said, you work with the cards you're dealt, and you do the best you can. And that's his attitude. And my brother-in-law, who is a former homicide detective, my sister told me, she said to him, "Do you have any heroes?" And he says, "Your brother."
Oh,
Yeah, we've been out there, and it's tough. It's very tough. And I think of any family who has children that have problems like that, it consumes their life. And fortunately, Robin and Joe are both professors, so they can work their schedule. So they can be. Somebody has to be with Ian all the time. I don't know how much time you have, but when Kathleen got leukemia, the little one, the Make-A-Wish Foundation said, "What do you want to do?" And of course, she was a little better at this time, much better, in fact. And her mother said to her, "Tell him you want to go to Paris." But so they have that sense of humor.
Yeah.
But she wanted to go to Disneyland. They were down there one day, but they couldn't stay because of Ian. You cannot take him out of his known environment. So it's been, but you'd never know that talking to my brother Joe.
Yeah, to be in the presence
Or
of
to
people
Robin.
like, yeah.
Mary,
what gives you energy and purpose at this time of your life? You've just moved back to campus, and after.
And I will say it's an adjustment, and
Yes,
I asked to
yes.
come back.
Thank you, yeah.
I wanted to come back, but there's a big adjustment because you're in an institute. Even though I'm in Regina, it's still there's institution. There's meals at certain times, but the thing that gives me energy is the people. People give me energy, and the things our congregation are involved in. Now, last night we had a meeting with our general council, and they told us various things that have been happening this past several months. And when I came out of there, I had such energy and inspiration and love that I'm in this congregation. It's a wonderful place, and I'm sure other congregations are great, but this is the one I'm in. And our women, we have wonderful leadership.
And to see we've lost a significant amount of our women, particularly in the last few weeks, months.
Yes.
And to see the General Council and many of our women who are very faithful, they're there for every goodbye and celebration.
Pleasant.
Yeah.
And they're pleasant all the time. They're interested in those of us that are living, and they're very faithful to those that have died.
What's the best piece, and then we're going to close this, what's the best piece of advice that you've been given that you'd like to give to us at this time?
Oh my goodness.
That contribute to who you are and your personality, which is always...
Well, I don't know if it's advice, but I love that quote from Micah. I'm going to mess it up. I love tenderly.
It begins, love tenderly.
It's something, and walk humbly with your God.
And you live that.
Well, thank you.
You live that by your presence. How would you like to be remembered?
As grateful, as somebody who is grateful to my family, my parents, my brothers and sister, and to this congregation, and that I was respectful to people, and a faithful friend.
A faithful, and that you are. that
Thank
are.
you.
So thank you, Mary Margaret.
Thank you, Margaret.
Don't I think you're mad at me when you call me Margaret?
No.
Just thank you so much, and it's a delight to have you back on this campus.
Well, thank
You're
you.
always a happy person to run into, and a very holy woman, because you always start those little daily quips, daily scripture, or just special sayings that
Special
help
things
you get through the day. So when you don't do it, I think, where is she?
Well, we do
Yeah.
it together.
Yeah.
You do it
Yeah,
too.
yeah.
So
Okay.
it is helpful, and it's nice to have like a little partner in that.
Thanks, Mary.
Thank you.